Om Magnir Murta Chakshusi Chandra Suryo Vishaha Shrutrivak Vivitasha Vedaha Vayu Prana Hridaya Vishvamasha Padbayam Prativihi Sarvabhutantaratman. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Verily, that one Supreme Being is the indwelling consciousness in all beings, in all things. Fire is its head, the sun and moon, its two eyes. The revelation of Scripture is its cosmic mind. The universe is its heart, its arms and legs, the four directions. Music is its voice, the wind is its breath, and from its feet the earth has originated. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Sham no Mitraha, Sham Varunaha, Sham no Bhavat Varyama, Sham no Indra Brihaspatihi, Sham no Vishnu Kramaha, Namo Brahmane, Namaste Vayu, Tvameva Pratjaksham Brahmasi, Tvameva Pratjaksham Brahma Vadishami, Ritam Vadishami, Satyam Vadishami, Tan Mamavatu, Tadvaktaran Avatu, Avatu Mam, Avatu Vaktaram. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Salutations to all beings, salutations to the ancestors, salutations to mankind, salutations to the celestials, salutations to the gods and goddesses, salutations to Brahma, Vishnu and Shiva, God with form, and salutations to the formless Brahman. Thou art what is real, what is true, and what is beneficial. Therefore protect me, protect my teachers, protect Guru, Dharma, and Sangha forevermore. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Sahana. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvi Navaditamastu Ma Vidvishovahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman, the reality, protect us. May Brahman sustain us. May Brahman illumine our thinking consciousness. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, or with the teachings. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om. Welcome today to our SRV association in Hawaii on the Big Island. We are coming to you live, or a live streaming audience, from Pepe Ikeo. It's a nice many-syllabled Hawaiian word. And you'll probably be learning some many-syllabled Sanskrit words today too, as we course on in our study of the Vedanta, today in tandem with the Tantra tradition. As you read great contemporary documents like the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, then you're finding out that he's speaking equally as much from the traditions of Tantra as he is from those teachings of Vedanta. So this series of classes, which we're going to offer over the next 4 weeks on Sunday, which you can join live stream if you're not on the Big Island of Hawaii, is all about this blending of the two great streams, Vedanta and Tantra. And necessarily, of course, we're going to have to include some unseen elements of the ancient Sankhya Yoga of Lord Kapila, which talked in terms of Purusha and Prakriti. It is the eternal double principles of consciousness and nature. And also you're going to find out that there is a lot of yoga mixed in with both Vedanta and Tantra. these are very hard to separate from one another when you do an overall study of Indian philosophy. When you take an Indian spiritual path, you might think you're doing yoga, you may think you're a Vedantist, or you may think you're a Buddhist, because that's also an Indian path. But what you're actually seeing and learning and hearing and observing and practicing, or a combination of all these darshanas, and the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna is a very good example of a sort of amalgam of all of these various yogas. We know, for instance, the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna's celestial song, there are 18 chapters, and they're each given a different yoga, a designation of a different yoga. There's even a designation for the yoga of depression. Yoga of depression is Arjuna Vishada yoga. Vishada means a kind of depressed state of mind. So in the beginning, this great soul, Arjuna, on the battlefield is very put upon and very unhappy because of the situation, the circumstances, the karma that he's fallen into. And so it's a good tantric way of looking at things, that if you have problems, or you have obstacles and impediments in your way, and some of them seem insurmountable, then basically in Indian philosophy you change your mind, change your attitude, change the makeup of your thinking, as we just chanted. May Brahman illumine our thinking consciousness, because if our mind becomes illumined, even if it becomes awakened, what to speak of illumined, then the whole world changes. And that's basically because the world is a manifestation of your mind. It isn't created in 7 days or created over 4,320,000,000 years. That's endless time that's going on. Who can fathom that? Who can put anything into an increment like that? A yuga or a Maha yuga. It's cyclic, and so it's always going on. And the tendency of the mind is to get flummoxed, confused by this constant passage of time, to where it can't even remember its past lifetime. That is, this mind that's transmigrating and going from one state of evolution to another. That would be an involution as well as evolution. Like you're waking, dreaming, and deep sleep tonight, you're actually involving, and then you're coming out and you're evolving. And that's all taking place in a 24-hour period, what to speak of 4,320,000,000 years. Consciousness being the eternal element in it all, the observer or the witness. So in this practice that you take on in Indian yoga, you end up looking through many different perspectives, hopefully all of them with a single eye. If thine eye be single, you shalt know the truth. So you look with a single eye on all of these various ways of seeing. They're called darshanas in India. And darshan isn't just going and seeing some famous popular spiritual person somewhere sitting on a throne. But basically darshana means to clearly see. And these 6 systems of orthodox philosophy, plus the unorthodox philosophies that didn't base their thinking directly on the Vedas, which is no problem for the Indian seer or for the Indian practitioner, are all to be included in the sweep of this great Indian philosophy and religion. Indian religion and philosophy were always considered at one in India. They were never divorced from each other, one to debate and the other one to practice worship or something. But we'll see by some of these teachings that we have over the next 4 weeks that these were always going on simultaneously, side by side. And as this chart on my left and on your right shows us, basically these were 2 great streams that were flowing into each other from time out of mind. And of course, you could say the currents and the eddies and the different rivers, confluences that were flowing into them were yoga and Samkhya and Buddhism and Tantra and others. So as Vedantists, we're sort of waking up to this fact that, as Westerners particularly, that when you read a great testament like the Gospel of Ramakrishna, that's maybe even in one paragraph you're getting a teaching that's coming from the yoga school, and the next sentence is coming from the tantric school, and the next sentence coming from the Vedanta. Sometimes you're finding that it's actually coming from the Vedas, which is pre-Vedanta. Vedanta is an assignment that happened much later because Vedavyas came along at a time when many of these Upanishads and scriptures were being lost, and Shankara after him also coalescing them and saving them. And he was putting together into a nice collection all of these Upanishads and Vedas that had been thought of and memorized and written down finally hundreds and hundreds of years prior to him. So when you talk about the Vedic period and the Vedanta, you're talking about two very different periods, because the Vedanta is basically Upanishad, the non-dual portion of the Vedas. And so there is a sort of evolution that you can note in these scriptures. There's no evolution in the soul that looks on, but there is an evolution that's going on in the world and also in the spiritual world that one should take note of. And then one can fathom and also revere the founders of these different traditions. If you walk up to Vedavyasa and say, thank you for the eight-limbed yoga, he's going to go, that happened, several hundred years back. You should give credit to Patanjali for that. So you're going to have to know your different systems, and then you're going to be able to revere the founder of that system, and therefore you will have a kind of darshan inside with beings who are long dead, because they know about the eternal moment and you don't. The appearance of their body was just a taking on of a form and a giving up, just like the ocean out there is expressing itself through waves and then withdrawing the waves and expressing it again. So this arising and this play and this falling is going on at all levels of existence, and you ought to know that so that you can identify more with the observer and less with the phenomena. And it's one of the big problems, again, how the mind gets confused, is it's identifying with outer phenomena. And sometimes, if it can get over that, it begins to identify more with inner phenomena, the outer and the inner being two sides of the same coin. But that same coin is this Advaitic tradition that we've been talking about, and in that is held the vast sweep of all these different darshanas. And that's why we call Mother India the mother of all religions, because she has not just one prophet and one great book, but hundreds of each. And these systems are proof of that. Further proof is that they're still living and still very much revered and taught by the gurus and the preceptors and the acharyas, even in this day and age, as we're sitting here now in this into this second millennium. So charts like this then are good to start off. We've looked at them already several times. Maybe our live stream audience might not have seen them, but you can see here running down the left side of the chart the Vedic stream, and on the other side the Tantric stream. The picture, by the way, is of Waipio Valley, which is just some 30 or 40 miles from here. One of our own Hawaiian valleys. A stream coming down that valley, and then it parts. And so when I saw that at one of our retreats, which we were doing back in that valley, I took a shot of that and used it as a backdrop for this splitting of, this apparent splitting of streams. Later on, the stream comes back together into one stream. So it's a good example of how Veda and Tantra, or Vedanta and Tantra, have been running side by side and commingling their waters, and again and again throughout this long sweep of time. So you could say basically, and these are general assignments, that if you follow the Vedic stream, you're going towards what's called tattvas, or principles. Veda has always concentrated a little bit more on the wisdom principles, the jnana tattvas, and Tantra has always been a little bit more settled upon the Upasanajan side of things, that is, deities and worship. Now, it doesn't mean that there's not a lot of wisdom in Tantra and there's not devotion in Vedanta. They just, according to temperament, that's basically how people will find their path, how they feel about any given path. In fact, I've been teaching Vedanta for decades. I always have people come up and say, when you were talking about this particular teaching, I was really attracted to that. And when I thought back at what teaching they were mentioning, it was a tantric teaching. So I tell them, oh, that's out of the Tantra tradition, basically. And they say, what path is that? I feel like that's my path. So you can teach Vedanta and have people get attracted to the Tantra. And that's happening all the time. People are a little bit more leaning towards, or their tendency is towards, these deities. And these deities also preside over these wisdom principles. Mantra, for instance, would be one of the great ways of coalescing deities and wisdom, so that you're not leaving them separate somehow, unconnected. But there's a mother of wisdom, see, and there's a god of death, and there's a goddess of abundance. And so all of these, how they coalesce and interconnect, is really the point here. So when these streams come together in time, then you find these great expressions, say like Tantric Buddhism. There's a wonderful blend of wisdom principles and worship of deities. The hundreds of Buddha fields and so forth. Then all of a sudden you say, well, that's beautiful, I like that, but you can't just remain an appreciator of art and collect tonkas and hang them on your wall. You're going to want to find out what these Buddha fields mean. And when you get into that, you find a teacher. And when you find a teacher, he begins to give you the whole side of the Dharmakaya, not just the Bodhakaya and the form of the Buddha, but the actual teachings of the Dharma which have come out of the Buddha and his many emanations. So all of a sudden you find yourself in the atmosphere of a beautiful blend of Tantra and Buddhism. And practice yoga. Yoga is always the practice of the thing. So in this chart, I don't want to, because we've seen this again, I don't want to spread it too thin, but basically that's why we've called Vedanta the brain, and Tantra the heart, yoga the energy, and Samkhya the body. Basically, this is taken off of an idea that Swami Vivekananda was spinning when he was alive back and came to the West in 1893. This great, vast Catholic mind is the Vedanta, with all its wisdom, its copious wisdom. And then when you get to the heart of things, you find the deities, and you find a great devotion to them. And you've arrived at the worship side, the inner worship side of things. But in order to put those two together and realize them in your life, you're going to have some energy. And that's where this yoga comes in. You're going to have to exert, and call it self-effort or discipline. And in that way, then you're going to fuse a third element with these other two, and you're going to have to practice what you hear and what you see. What you hear is the Vedanta, and what you see is the Tantra, these great deities, like on your altar, for instance, the image, the divine images. And then finally, the whole body of the thing is basically what Lord Kapila laid out for us, 24 cosmic principles. From the bottom up, 5 elements, and then 5 active senses, and then 5 cognitive senses, and then the subtle elements, and then you put those together, and you're coming up with some 20 principles, and then you add the fourfold mind on top of that, and you've got 24. So in this sweep of classic Samkhya, or Prasamkhya, sometimes they call it, you have these various principles that you find have been laid out from earliest time, so that other philosophers could come along and found their systems. In other words, basically, if you have 24 cosmic principles, you're indicating what Shankara later called the non-self. This is all insentient matter, and getting more sentient as it moves inside, as you move inside as the observer, and find out that you're not the body, and you're not the senses, and then you're not the cognitive senses, and finally you're not even your dreams, the stuff that subtle elements are made out of. And you go beyond that, and you find yourself posited in your own intelligence. And you move beyond that, and you find out there's an ego that's sort of presiding over the whole mess, you see. And you're going to want to also pop that ego bubble, or deflate that ego. And when you do that, all of a sudden you find the meaning of bliss, the meaning of peace that passes all understanding. When you find these other great qualities inside you, there's a whole rain cloud of Dharma mega samadhi, a whole rain cloud of virtues that was hidden behind all those things, and which were actually yours all the time, but until you moved through that process of involution, spiritual involution, you didn't know that. You thought that your qualities were something you had to attain outside through certain pursuits in the world. You find out that's not the case at all, that these inherent characteristics are the makeup of your higher mind, of your higher consciousness. And then finally, you move beyond attributes to the attributeless Brahman. And that's why I chanted today, Sham no mitraha, Sham varunaha, Sham no bhavat varyama, Sham no indra, brihaspatihi. These are all names of powers, gods, deities. Brihaspati was the teacher of the gods, actually. He was a human who was the teacher of the gods. And then finally, salutations to Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, God with form. And you can't find any higher form than those beings. And then finally, salutations to the formless Brahman. Namo Brahmane, namaste vayu. Salutations to Brahman and salutations to all the atmospheres that are existing inside of the formless Brahman. So step by step, akasha by akasha, space by space, and understanding by understanding, you move in this great involution towards the formless Brahman. And that is the Advaita. And that is the ocean to which these rivers are all flowing, and into which they will mingle again, and out of which they will come in these endless cycles. So Vedanta on one side, Tantra on the other, if you want to put it in this way, the great mind of India, its heart, its divine energy, and its body. And since we've looked at these charts already quite a bit, I just want to mention them in passing, and we can move on to some other teachings. A little bit accenting the Tantra, because we've been studying so much Vedanta, and I basically teach from the Vedantic platform, but when we get a chance to discuss the Tantra, that element in us that attracts us towards our teacher, attracts us towards relationships with other beings, hopefully higher relationships, spiritual relationships, and less of the senses only, but more in the thinking mind, then we're talking about this element of Tantra that unfortunately has a rather bad reputation nowadays, because it has deteriorated so much and has been looked at from the standpoint of gross lower senses only, and practices that are rather esoteric and probably somewhat off-putting to the Western sensibility. Like, we don't find many Westerners going to the graveyard and sitting on a dead corpse, for instance, in order to get rid of aversion. That's a tantric practice. So there are some very strange tantric practices that probably could have only been done in places like India, and in the West you won't find them being done. But there are also some great tantric teachings that can be taken in to our yoga, taken in as a part of our practice, and we'll find that those are also inherent to our thinking process. So as we come down, then you find the Vedic stream giving way to Jnana Yoga, basically, and you find the Tantric stream connecting very much with the Bhakti Yoga. So you can see the direction of the two streams. And you might say in the middle is this meditation on both, Raja Yoga and then Karma Yoga. So these are the four main yogas: the yoga of wisdom, which connects very much back towards the Vedanta; the yoga of bhakti or devotion, which would be the main exponent of Tantra, that is, Tantra meaning over here, Shaktism, Vaishnavism, Shaivism, and so forth, and some of the Tibetan Buddhist schools. That is basically worship of the deities, and if I say salutations to Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, they're all represented there, aren't they? And also Shakti, Divine Mother, is represented there. So that's God with form, And the Tantra has everything to reveal to us about that, how these great deities inside of us connect to our heart, and therefore how we can connect the heart to the mind. We can get Meda Kendra, we can get the combination of the thinking mind and the devoted heart, and put those two together into one great force for realization. Now, you see also as it comes down, you'll find the six orthodox darshan is falling in under the Vedantic heading. That is basically, you'll have these, the Samkhya of Kapila and the Yoga of Patanjala and the Vedanta of Vedavyas, and then three others which are right now less available to us. Some of them very ancient and not practiced, or they've been absorbed into the darshanas of Yoga, Samkhya, and Vedanta. I'd say Yoga, Samkhya, and Vedanta are still very prevalent. Samkhya is beginning to fade, so we want to try and bring it back as the foundation, the body of things. But you can say that probably Vedanta and Yoga are very much alive and well, and they're even finding a foothold here in the West. We want to make sure that when Yoga finds a foothold here, it's not just Hatha. We should call Hatha Hatha, and we should call Yoga Yoga. Yoga in this case is going to mean the eight-limbed yoga. I could have a chart on that to show you later on in our series of classes, because it's mentioned as one of the great principles of Maha Yoga. That is, yoga, Kundalini Yoga, if you've heard of it, really kind of fall under a greater heading of Maha Yoga, the great yoga. And so we'll see how that happens. So you can see that basically Yoga and Vedanta are probably fairly well known by even the Westerners, and many people are still keeping them as a part of their understanding and practice. If you go down the other side of the chart, on the tantric side, you can see that it moves through the Bhakti Yoga, Yoga of devotion, and connects to the five main sects. Shaktism, which is over here again, Shaivism, Vaishnavism, Ganapatya, which is worship of Sri Ganesha. There's actually quite a few hundred thousands of people that are still worshipping Ganesha or Ganapati as their main deity. And that's basically a tantric path. Usually when we mention Tantra in the West, there's a sort of misnomer, there's a sort of misconception about it meaning only Divine Mother. So when you talk about Tantra, you're thinking, oh, it's basically just Shaktism. But we have to widen our concept and our understanding about what Tantra is, and include Vaishnavism and Shaivism, the worship of Shiva and the worship of Vishnu, which of course Vishnu would then be Krishna and Ram too. And you'll find out that, in adding Ganapati in there, and also the worship of Surya, sun, which is very ancient, the sun. Then you'll find out you have a more complete understanding or rendering of what Tantra is. It's the worship of these five main deities. Sometimes they're called Pancha. That is Shaivism, Shaktism, Ganapatism, Saurism, and Vaishnavism. So those five main sects can be mentioned as a good representation of that tantric stream. And therefore you can see how when you study the Vedanta, say if you read the Upanishads, you're still coming forth with these teachings, these mentions of Shiva, or these mentions of Vishnu or Krishna, or the mentions of Ganapati, or sometimes of Divine Mother. Then you find out, I thought this was a Vedantic path. Then you find out that it's almost inseparable from these deities. These deities really quite often were early on in the Vedic period. Possibly before the Vedic period, there was a tantric period. Indigenous peoples of India, you could call them, that worshipped Shiva and Divine Mother. Shiva and Shakti, they call it, the divine couple. And that was very ancient, along the Indus River. Indus later Indus River, they later used that to come up with the word Hindu. So this great blending of two streams is something that we ought to mention right out the top in these series of 4 classes about Vedanta and Tantra, so that we know that the two of them are constantly mingling their waters, and that they're based on a sort of great castle like this tower of non-dual truth as we see here. And it includes cosmic mind, unmanifested prakriti, and manifested prakriti too. If you want to know the meanings of those terms, then you go to nature, the word nature in English, and you find out that there's a manifested side to it, which is the 5 elements and their congregation of them into objects, 5 elements into objects. And then you also have to, in the same breath, make sure that you acknowledge unmanifested prakriti, which is the thoughts of these things. Everything back into the great mind. The great cosmic mind has imbued with unmanifested prakriti, which is the concepts and the thoughts of worlds of name and form, which are still in a state of abeyance. They haven't broken into form yet. So you could see then, if you were to make a great journey from the outer to the inner, you would have to start with manifested prakriti and say, there's the 5 elements. How many of us look out on the greenery and everything and break it down into the 5 elements? Not too many. They just kind of move amongst the world. When they see water, it's just water. They don't connect it to taste. When they see earth, it's just earth. They don't connect it to smell. And when they see light, they don't connect it to the eyes. It's just a matter of sort of how they say, taking everything for granted. Taking everything for granted and not specifying. So then when it comes time to enter into a spiritual path, you find out you're sort of left in a lurch, that you have to account for the 5 elements and you have to connect them to the 5 senses before you can leave the realm of the outer world, manifested prakriti, and get into the world of the inner consciousness, from the outer to the inner, from the finite towards the infinite. And then when you get into the inner world, you're going to have to connect these 5 gross senses and these 5 gross elements to 5 subtle elements and 5 subtle senses, which are probably best illustrated by your dream state tonight. You also see, taste, touch, hear, and smell in a dream. And you also compose worlds in the dream made out of 5 subtle elements. That is, you have earth, air, fire, water, and ether in a dream tonight too, don't you? So you're beginning to move towards an inner realm, and that's what they mean by unmanifested prakriti. It's nature held back in a sort of subtle state. And it's beginning to move you towards a causal state, which is the subtle side of unmanifested prakriti. That is, basically, if you go into deep sleep, all of that disappears. And if you go into samadhi, nirvana, that also disappears. So, in order to make this great journey then, a sort of cosmological understanding is going to have to be undertaken and accomplished by the seeker. That's going to make them a more complete practitioner. It's not just, say, if I go the Bhakti path and I dance and sing and I'm making merry and I'm having some Bhakti, that's not going to be enough. Or if I go towards just the study of the scriptures and it remains sort of pedantic and plodding, sterile, that's not going to be enough. If I just understand with my intellect about the words of the teachings and the teachers, that's not going to be enough. I'm going to have to make a complete study of everything, which essentially is my own being. I'm studying my own being here. And for so long, maybe for many lifetimes, I've only studied its outer aspect. Basically, that's what science is doing, and biology and chemistry and those kinds of lesser sciences. We call them Vedangas in our tradition. then I'm just making a study of everything external. So when I make a study of everything external, I should come to a conclusion, shouldn't I, about it? The conclusion, if you want to summate it, is, oh, it's always changing. It's mutable. It's shifting sand, as Christ told his apostles. It's unreal, as Shankara told his disciples. So I make a conclusion about that, and when I make that conclusion, then I begin to look for the origin of manifested prakriti. And then I'm going to make the connections back to unmanifested prakriti. And finally to the cosmic mind itself, the Mahat, which is one of Samkhya's great contributions. That is, out of the Mahat, the great mind, everything, all these 24 cosmic principles are going to be spilling into manifestation. So now I know a little bit about manifested and unmanifested prakriti, so I have a much greater grasp of the kingdom of heaven within me, and what that means, what Christ meant by that, or that my Father's mansion has many chambers. I mean, those are cryptic sayings out of the various teachings. And they were also mentioned by Lord Buddha, and they were also mentioned by Krishna back in the Gita when he taught his disciples, Arjuna, Uddhava, and others. So basically now they have this greater sweep, this greater understanding of what is essentially going to be called the great self within, and everything that comes out of it. And basically, tracing origins will lead you to a formless state, and you'll see where everything came from. Why Christ told John, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was trying to summate in a few sentences this unstruck sound, or this primal source of everything, which is Om. We call Om in our tradition. So then it brings in mantras and bijams, the great seed sayings, the great seed syllables, like Hrim and Aim and Shrim and other great three-syllabled or four-syllabled words, which basically, when you say them, contain creation, preservation, and destruction within them. Ha-ra-im. And the M also means dissolution. So in one word, you're talking about something that was projected, something that was sustained for a while, and something that was dissolved. All in one four-syllable or three-syllable word, like Om or Hrim. And these are shared by Vedanta and Tantra, these great bijams, seeds. They're shared by both. That is, both traditions, both streams got very interested in the word. And long before Christ mentioned it to John, thousands of years before. So they were very much interested in this, and so when you talk about mantras and bijams, it's sort of a connecting point between Veda and Tantra. They each had their own scriptures, the Vedas, there were 4 of them, and then the Upanishads, 108 of them, spilled out of those. But the Tantra had its various tantric scriptures too, and they're so vast and so wide that nobody ever really systematized them. And this is one reason why we don't know much about Tantra, and we're taking it to mean so many other things, like relationships between the sexes, or the enjoyment of intoxicants. You see, that's what Tantra has come to mean to the West, basically. Intoxicants and relationships between the two genders. It's really a shame that that's all that we think of when we think of Tantra. But really part of the blame lies not only with us in not digging deeper, but in the fact that the Tantric scriptures were so uncategorized, unsystematized. You see, in yoga, somebody came along and systematized it. 8-limbed yoga of Patanjali was sort of the great conclusion about all of yoga. Here's what you can do to practice in order to get samadhi. Buddhism, too, heavily systematized through through the many ages, and how Buddhism spread to all the various countries as Zen and Tibetan Buddhism and so forth. Vedanta systematized by Vedavyas at a time when it was about to be lost. See, Samkhya, well systematized by Lord Kapila. But Tantra, who systematized it? It was just too vast. And its teachings were very esoteric. So that is part of the reason why we don't recognize the tantric element in things. We basically just feel it. When we talk about the gods and the goddesses, we talk about pujas, going to puja, or having celebrations, or sitting in front of our shrine and lighting candles and burning incense and offering flowers. This is all tantric. This is the tantric element things. It's what we do to express our devotion. As if you're getting into Vedantic circles, you're not seeing too much devotion there. You see, the devotion is all behind the scenes. It's devotion to discrimination. That's what it is. It's devotion to non-dualism. It's very hard to have devotion to something abstruse. In non-duality, there's no devotee and devotion going on. There's no God and worshipper. That's all tantric. So I can go on and on about this because it needs to be said to the Western practitioner and to the Western audience so that they understand that there are great currents in this mingling of two streams. And that's why these two charts need to be showed first in this series. Please write in with questions. If you're in the live stream audience, I can be reached through my website and through my own email. If you want to find out more about this, because we don't want to take up a huge amount of time, but basically has to be left in a sort of general way. So in that way then, I want to move on from this explication of the two streams, so we know how they mingle together and how they're formed of these four basic great darshanas and how they contain 6 great darshanas, and also how they contain all the great sects. Sects means the 5 main sects of India. And if we can understand that, then we have a sort of grand overview of what Mother India proposes and what our spiritual path is giving us when we enter into it, any Indian spiritual path, or when we study any Indian philosophy. And we know that those things are there. And don't forget the non-dual side of it, which is the thread which runs through all of these very basic, this fabric. The non-dual thread, like Krishna said, that the thread running through the pearls. That's unseen, but it's what's keeping everything together. So the Advaitic or non-dual element is, of course, something we have to keep in mind. And we study that on its own, separately, as we have been doing with our Advaitic classes. Now, in order to segue nicely, let's look at this chart about the 2 other designations, which are also very profound, that we want to be able to understand. Basically, you see here Maha Yoga and Abava Yoga. It's very important to have this kind of teaching, and it's also good to connect it. It's almost a correlation we can make between Vedanta and Tantra. Vedanta tends to go towards, with its wisdom principles, tends to go towards non-dual samadhi. And on its way, it negates. It's a certain type of temperament that's going to like this. Usually the kind of temperament that doesn't care for ritual for whatever reason. Maybe it's not in its makeup to be attracted to gods and be attracted to devotions and doing pujas and that kind of thing. It's more, maybe you might call, more conservative temperament. And so it's going to move along by the path of neti, not this, not this. It's going to want to get things behind, get behind me, as Christ said. Going to get all of these forms and names and various elements of devotion behind them and get on to the main crux of the matter, So basically they call that Abava yoga. It's a kind of a designation that you can assign towards some of the Buddhist schools and some like Zen and some of the schools of Vedanta that go for the more non-dual essence of the thing. They're going to want to cut away rather than add on. And so a lot of those schools proceed by not this, not this. That's what neti neti means. And so that would be the more Abava school. You can see it listed there. They perceive reality with form, and then they negate the outer world, and they begin to perceive God as a sort of formlessness, even a voidness. So where form begins to disappear, that's where Abava kicks in. And so they say, practice that and begin to wear Abava as a sword that cuts through all name and form so that you can always see the nameless, formless reality. They cut to the chase in the schools of Abava yoga. So it's a kind of subdivision of yoga that we can note. And on its other side is Maha yoga, the great yoga. And there you see perception of reality as one's own self, knowing reality not only beyond form, but in form, and having blissful communion with divine reality. And so Maha yoga tends to say, you might say, all this, all this. And Abava yoga tends to say, not this, not this. And so these two great tendencies in philosophy, in religion, and also in the human mind are there. We tend, as Ramakrishna Vedantists, if you can pardon the term, we tend to move towards a synthesis of the two. We tend to say or admit that both of these exist in the devotee. And you could probably see it in your own practice. Sometimes you, yes, I might say it, sometimes you feel like a nut, sometimes you don't, as the old commercial says. So basically, sometimes you feel like form, sometimes you feel like formlessness. And so we find this in both of these in all of us. You see, that is, sometimes your practice is going on and you're feeling very drawn towards deities, towards devotion, and you feel wet. You see, that's wet with devotion. Other times you feel like you want to dry off. So all of a sudden your mind changes and you're not feeling that devotion anymore towards the deities, and sometimes you feel critical of yourself because of that. Where did my devotion go? But really you don't have to worry about that. You can begin to appreciate the Abava side of your nature, the formless side of your nature. Maybe the deity is actually telling you, like the Mother, Divine Mother. This is where Mother Kali or Mother Durga comes in. She's actually telling you, don't worry about devotions and pujas and flowers and forms. Why don't you begin to concentrate on the formless side of things and see how you acclimatize there. So go ahead, let forms disappear. Transcend the lower chakras, begin to come up to the third eye where forms begin to dissolve. And that's where all of a sudden you might say, I feel like going on retreat to a very high mountain pilgrimage and doing away with everything and just sitting in formless meditation. And all of a sudden you have a great inclination to do that. It's enough of forms, enough of devotions, enough of singing and dancing. All of a sudden I'm feeling like my nature is tending and leaning towards formlessness, and I want to get into meditation and just see the light and put everything behind me. So that is the side of yoga called Abava. Abava means actually no moods. That's one definition for it. No moods whatsoever. Abava. Bhavas are moods. So I'm actually having a mood of no moods. And so that's a part of your spiritual life. It's a part of the heart and mind's conjoining. You might say maybe the mind's getting the upper hand there and it's going into a non-dual state. And in another part, the heart gets the upper hand and it begins to practice devotions and feel more attracted to the deities. So here again, you see, we're moving back, aren't we, towards Vedic and Tantric streams. Sometimes we're feeling like the deities, sometimes we want to put away the deities and just go towards the self. Bare, naked, stripped of everything, just pure consciousness alone, or timeless, deathless awareness. And that's what we are in for in that particular time. And both are hand in hand, you see. You're going back and forth between these two great streams. Now, to practice both of them is an interesting thing. See, as we move down the chart here, let's not forget the quotes. Shaktism, Shaivism, with Samkhya as cosmological basis, yoga as practice, and Vedanta as non-dual philosophy is Maha Yoga. So the great yoga that you want to practice is holds all of this within it. Therefore, you want to move towards practicing things like the Bhakti according to sage Narada, or the Ram's 9 limbs of Bhakti. See, there you have them there. Association with the holy, reciting accounts about God, singing God's glories, hearing teachings about reality, devoted service of the teacher and the gurus, worship, purity and self-control, repetition of the mantra, selfless service with non-attachment, and seeking out the nature of reality. That's called 9 limbs of Bhakti. Let's look more specifically at it here. If we look at the 9 limbs of Bhakti, which is actually a book I wrote, but it hasn't been published yet. We have to look into publishing that book so that we can look at these more closely. You can see here more directly what the 9 limbs of Bhakti are contained of. Basically, it has to do with a teaching that comes in the Adhyatma Ramayana. Most of us have heard about the Ramayana, the great story of Ram, Sita, and Ravana, and Hanuman, the monkey god, another great deity that people love. So when you have the Bhakti school, it's very likely that you're going to come across the teachings of Sri Ram, like for instance in some of the musical testaments. See? Sarva Mangala Koshalendaya Mahaniya Gunadaya Chakravarti Tanujaya Sarva Bhaumaya Mangalam Shri Sita Ramachandra 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 Shri Sita Ramachandra. So these are some of the great sentiments about Sri Ram. He's Sarva Mangala, he's the most auspicious of the auspicious. He gave way to these great teachings about the 9 limbs of Bhakti. And he's everywhere. Andara Rama, Bahira Rama, Jahadekataha Rama, Hirama Rama Rama, Jagata Rama, Sovata Rama, Sapane Me Deko, Raja Rama Rama Rama. So it means, well, Ram is everywhere. Everywhere I see him in everything. It's one of the great mantras and these beautiful verses that are associated with the Vaishnava path. That's one of those tantric paths that we look into when we find teachings like that. So 9 limbs of Bhakti have come out of teachings by Sri Ram. First of all, he wants you to associate with the holy. Shankara says, through the company of the holy arises non-attachment. Through non-attachment arises freedom from delusion. Through freedom from delusion arises steadfastness. And through steadfastness comes liberation. You know basically where that comes from, right? You hear it? Satsangatve nirmohatvam nirmohatve nishchalitatve nishchalitatve nishchalitatvam nishchalitatve jivan mukti Bhaja Govindam Bhaja Govindam Bhaja Govindam Mudamate Samprapte Sanihite Kale Nahi Nahi Rakshati Dukrin Karine So Satsangatve Visangatvam Visangatve Nirmohatvam Nirmohatve Nishchalitatvam Nishchalitatve Jivan Mukti. That's a devotional song that's non-dual in its implications. It's very rare to have devotion mixed with these great teachings of non-duality. We mentioned Bhakti and Jivan Mukti in the same verse, in the same breath. Satsangatve, that is, through the company of the holy, satsang. Satsangatve, nisangatvam. Nisangatve, nirmohatvam, becomes nirmohatvam, free of delusion. Moha is delusion. So through the company of the holy, you get freedom from delusion. And from freedom delusion, you get nishchalitatve. That is nischala, resolve about my spiritual path. I get resolved to move forward in my quest for enlightenment, if you want to put it that way. And from that comes freedom from delusion, and from freedom from delusion becomes liberation in this life. So we sing then, Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam, Mudamate. Chant the names of the Lord repeatedly and unceasingly. Tradition of Advaita in Vaishnavism, basically. We find that this non-dual thread is running through the teachings of Krishna, of Ram, and of Shankara, because he wrote this song. So here's how you bring Vaishnavism and Shaivism back together. If they ever parted, you see, and had any debates or arguments, then the followers of Krishna and the followers of Shankara should get back together through songs like this, because Shankara was singing about devotion, singing about the need for devotion in spiritual life. There was a great story about that once Ram, who gives us this beautiful teaching, right, and Shiva were talking, and they had a disagreement, and so they had a momentary spat, you see. So they turned and walked away from each other. And as Ram was walking away, he said, "Oh my God, I've just insulted the God of wisdom, Shiva. I must go back and apologize." And as Shiva was walking away, he just said, "Ram is the Lord of love. I can't insult him. I must go back and apologize." So they both turned and met and apologized and hugged. And said, "I'm so sorry I said that." However, the devotees of Ram are the monkeys, and the devotees of Shiva are the ghosts and ghouls, you see. So they heard about the spat, and they started warring against each other, never forgave each other. See? So this is the problem. See, the great ones will always immediately forgive and see where they've made their mistakes, but the followers will not. The followers will go on disagreeing over some little thing. And wars are born out of such things. Wars here are philosophical wars too, as not philosophical wars eventually degrade into actual physical wars. And this is how religious war gets started, crusades and so forth. But if you look at something like Buddhism, you'll find out that it spread over the world, warring against ignorance without ever raising a finger. It's the most marvelous thing in all of religious history, is the fact that Buddhism spread everywhere without raising a finger. And it turned people away from animal sacrifice. It turned people into vegetarians. And more importantly than that, it turned people into adopting the mode of ahimsa, non-violence. nonviolence was always first in India. The first yogic precept, called yama, is ahimsa. Must be nonviolent in thought, word, and deed. Now there's basically, in tantric practice, there it is right there. You must be intelligent, a non-dualist, devoted to scriptures, pure of heart, master of the senses, and peaceful and non-violent. That is the 7 qualifications of a tantric aspirant. So if you look at yoga, if you look at Tantra, and if you look at Vedanta, they agree on this. You must be non-violent in thought, word, and deed in order to be a spiritual aspirant. You cannot. Same with Buddhism, right? You must be non-violent. What about Jainism? Isn't Jainism the most non-violent of all? They won't even breathe a microbe. They'll cover their face with a mask in order not to destroy something. They won't step on an insect. So in these great darshanas, they all agree about this importance of non-violence in thought, in word, and in deed. And so Shankara is singing Bhaja Govindam, let's adore the Lord with a loving heart. And as we do adore the Lord, we should look for holy company, see. And when we find holy company, we'll find that satsang, gatve, begins to destroy our delusion, our ignorance, near mohatvam. And when we get destruction of delusion, we'll find realization in this life. That's called jivan mukti, liberation. Nahi nahi rakshati dukrin karane. When the time for death comes, what good will grammatical rules and various outer things do you? You should have been spending your life in devotion to the Lord and the refinement of discrimination between the real and the unreal. Those are the 2 messages of Vaishnavism and Shaivism. You put them together, it's called jivan mukti, liberation in this life. The destruction of ignorance for now and forevermore. Are you enlightened? They ask. I don't know, but I know my ignorance is dead. If my ignorance is dead, then if that's enlightenment, then I am enlightened. See? So put to death ignorance with the sword of wisdom and be free. And you can do it with the Bhakti path, and you can do it with the path of wisdom, but you can do it quicker by combining them both. So associating with the holy is very important. That's the first limb of bhakti, which is coming out of this teaching, again, just to remember of Maha Yoga, how Maha Yoga manifests as limbs of bhakti and practice of devotion. We'll look at that too, but right now we're looking at the limbs of bhakti. What's the second one? Spreading the teachings. They who are well grounded in knowledge and who share their wisdom, who rejoice in freedom, who are full of light, they win nirvana, even in this world. Nirvana, it reminds me of something. Aham nirvikalpo nirakara rupo vivatvacha sarvatra sarvendriyanam nacha sangatam naiva muktirnameya chirananda rupaha shivoham shivoham because the Lord of devotion, Sri Ram, mentions nirvana. So does that mean he doesn't know about getting into a non-dual state? Because nirvana is the blowing out of all delusions, the destruction of all desires, blowing out, making extinct all worlds of name and form based on the desire to create, preserve, and destroy. So nirvana is mentioned. It's come out of the lips of the great God of devotion, Sri Ram. So are we supposed to make any other conclusion than bhakti and jnanam are two sides of the same coin? How about meditation and action? Can we bring those two yogas together? Raja and karma yogas together? We should also bring them together too. So these yogas are to be synthesized. They're not to be left as separate compartments that we never explore. They're part of the convergence of the two great streams of Vedanta and Tantra, which is the name of the 4 classes that we are taking on Sunday for the next month. The convergence of the two streams of Veda and Tantra. So when you look into one, you find mention of the other. You can sing it in a song, you can give it in a discourse, but you're basically always pointing towards the coalescence of these great teachings, teachers, and philosophies. That's about spreading the teachings. So he says again, those who rejoice in freedom, share their wisdom, they win nirvana in this world. They get free. So spread the teachings amongst your friends, amongst your family. Be ready to be laughed at. Be ready to be ostracized. Be ready to be refused and denied. But you must keep on until this sinks in, as it did with you. The third limb of bhakti is singing God's glories. What purpose can these ears serve if every sound is not heard as the sweet nectar of God's names, flooding our eyes with tears of ecstasy? That song goes on to say, well, what purpose do these eyes see if they don't see God in everything and in everyone? What purpose does this tongue really serve if it doesn't chant the names of the Lord and repeat its mantra all the time? What good do these hands, if all they do is grasp after things and take them to the self? Why aren't they serving God and all beings? What good are these feet if they don't take me to pilgrimage to holy temples and into the company of the holy? Instead, just make me wander around samsara endlessly, you see. So what good are these senses, active and cognitive, if they aren't leading me towards enlightenment? And in the meantime, serving God and humanity, karma yoga, worshipping the Lord, bhakti yoga, hearing the teachings and realizing them, jnana yoga, and meditating on the divine reality, raja yoga. That's in the meantime until I get my realization. Then I should be using all these mechanisms for the highest good of all beings, see. So singing God's glory is very important. Hearing the teachings is next, the 4th limb of these 7 limbs of bhakti. The 9 limbs of bhakti. He says, you will find me in those sacred places where my names are being chanted and my teachings are being transmitted. Who said that? Sri Krishna. Who did he say it to? Uddhava. Why did he say it to Uddhava? Because he was about to pass away from the body and Uddhava found out. Krishna says, I'm leaving the body tomorrow. And Uddhava said, but Lord, I've just found you. You're my ideal. What will happen to me if you leave me? Where will I find you? And he said, you will find me in those sacred places where my names are being chanted and my teachings are being transmitted. He said further, look for me around the Duni fires of the holy beings who gather and speak about me at night and who meditate from midnight to 4. There you'll find me, dwelling in their hearts. In other words, I'm not a form, so I can't die and I can't be born. Namrityor Nashanka Nami Jati Beda. I have no birth and no death. Pita Naiva Me Naiva Mata Majanma. I have no father and I have no mother. What did Christ say to his parents when they found him after he was lost? Where did you go? Christ said, where would I go? I have to be about my Father's business. Do you think I belong to you? He was just a teenager when he said that. So I have no family, I have no mother, I have no father, I have no birth, I have no death. And my main business is my Father's business. That's the only reason I'm here. In other words, I've renounced the worlds of name and form. Outright. Flat out, I renounced them. Say peace to all, no danger be from me to aught that lives. From those who dwell on high to those who lowly creep, I am the self in all. All worlds, both here and there, do I renounce. All heavens, all earths, all hells, all hopes and all fears. I renounce them. Thus cut thy bonds. Thus be thou calm. Thus be thou free, sannyas and bold. Say your mantra, Om Tat Sat Om. So this is the words of a great being. This is the mindset of an illumined soul. This is all they think about. This is the only reason they're here. So he says, serve the teacher then. Serve those beings. That's the fifth limb. Whoever is devoted to God and who delights in service of a teacher, to such a person, moksha, liberation, is an attainment already at hand. Find a teacher, serve the teacher, and so Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, basically, find a teacher, bow down to that teacher, serve that teacher, and then he will initiate you into the highest wisdom. Tad vidhi pranipatena paripasnyena sevaya upadekshanti te jnana jnaninas tattva darshanaha. It is, he says in the Gita, he will initiate you into the highest wisdom, tattva darshanaha. Is that what we're talking about here? Tattvas and darshanas, right? So in one sentence, Sri Krishna summates it basically. Find a teacher, serve the teacher will then initiate you into the highest wisdom, and you'll be free. Those will gain moksha. To such a person, moksha is an attainment already at hand. Why is it already at hand? Because you cannot gain liberation. Liberation is already your true nature. It's who you are. Freedom. You cannot get it from practice. You cannot get it through evolution. Time will not bring it to you. Luck certainly will not bring it to you. Good fortune will not bring it to you. Destiny will not bring it to you. Destruction of karmas will not bring it to you. Bowing at a guru's feet will not bring it to you. Destroying the mind's wave in meditation will not bring it to you. It's already yours. That's the Advaita Vedanta. That's the non-dual truth of the matter. So, you're looking for liberation in all the wrong places. If that's the case, you should instead sit and say, freedom is my true nature. That's why we just chanted, we just sang, basically. Chidananda Rupaham Shivoham Shivoham Om Chidananda Rupaha. I'm the very Rupa, the form of Chit, consciousness. I am the blissful consciousness, Chidananda. I am Shiva, I am Shiva. Shivoham, Shivoham is one of the great mantras. In one word, you have liberation. Shivoham, I am Shiva. I am ever free. Shiva means auspiciousness. I am the auspicious one. So therefore, these first 5 limbs of bhakti make great sense in whatever perspective you put them in. The next one is undergoing purification. If one fiber is sticking out of the thread, it will be impossible to thread the needle. Likewise, if purification is not practiced early on, realization will not be possible later. Who said that? Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. That is the R in the SRV, where you are right now. You're in SRV Loka. This is what we talk about in SRV Loka. Is truth a great secret? Not here. It's broadcast, because we're supposed to spread the teachings. You see. So we can't strew pearls before swine, can we? So if you're animalistic, then you're not going to come here, you're not going to listen. We can't come to you and teach you either. It'd be like giving you a pearl, to a swine. They don't know the value of it. They'll eat it. So Tantra has that teaching for you. There are three kinds of beings. Pasu, animalistic. Virya, heroic. And Daiva, divine. Three kinds of beings. You could say maybe the worldly, the warrior, and the sage, if you want to put it in kind of more New Age, contemporary language. But it's an ancient teaching in Tantra. Pasu is animalistic. Not hard to find them. They're quite common in this world. They're still attached to material objects for pleasure, and they're trying to hoard wealth for personal satisfaction. And they get into other problems too. So when they begin to hoard wealth and dominate over others, then they become evil. They turn to the demonic side of their nature. And they accrue much karma through causing suffering to others. That's all basically the realm of Pasu. It's a tantric teaching, the three types of beings. Pasu is animalistic, but Virya begins to veer away from animalistic tendencies, and it begins to practice heroic things. Gee, I think I will practice loka sangraha. That is, the highest good for all the worlds. I'm now the diplomat, you see. I'm now the harbinger of the highest good for all living beings, loka sangraha. So it's a term Krishna used in the Gita. I look over all the worlds. I oversee all the worlds and all the people in them for their highest good. That's heroic. The heroic person will start to sit like this, and practice meditation. He'll serve God and other beings. He'll give up selfish pursuits and start living for others. And he'll serve God, spread the teachings and so forth. So that's Virya. But then when he becomes Daiva, Daiva means divine. That's the seer, the sage, the saint, the savior. Those are divine beings. And their very bones teach. They're sacred by their very proximity. They don't have to do anything. They don't have to lift a finger. Just by their very presence, they confer blessings on everyone, including the society. And they don't care if you slap them on one side of the face, they'll ask you to slap them on the other, to balance out the pain. So this is why undergoing purification is very important early on. So to get rid of your animalistic tendencies and to become heroic. So you won't be able to, as Christ said, it's harder for a rich man to get into heaven. You see, it's as hard as a camel passing through the eye of a needle. So if there's one thread sticking out, one fiber sticking out of your thread, and you're trying to pass it through that needle, it's not going to go. So you must smooth that out early on. So this means what? There's one word in English which I use so much all the time. What am I saying? What do you need early on? Qualification. You must qualify yourself in the yogas. That means you need to practice and learn them before you begin to apply them to your life. That is, fence with the sword of wisdom and the sword of action, not just the sword of action. You get into the world and you make a mess of things and you accrue karmas because you don't have the knowledge of how to work things. So qualify yourself in these great teachings, then move out into the world. That's all about purification, or we call it shuddhi. There's purification of act, there's purification of deeds, there's purification of energy, and there's purification of mind. Those are the three great purifications. That is, act and deed are one. That's a tantric teaching. So you might have thought it was Vedantic. Surprise, surprise, the three Shuddhis, the three purifications, are a tantric teaching. So now we're hearing Vedanta and we know that there's tantric elements in it. Purification has to do with yoga too. You're going to have to do some effort, right? So if I want to purify my acts and my deeds, I must start with a purification of location. Why is that there? That's an altar. It's got a picture of Mother Tara on it. And there's a plumeria flower offered in front of it, and 2 candles, and some incense is burning there. This is tantric worship. See? What does it do? It purifies the atmosphere. That's the first purification. If you walk into a house and there's no shrine, and there's no candles, and there's no fire, and there's no incense, there's no sacred scents, then basically this world is not for you, nor is the next, Krishna says, because you're without sacred rites. If those things are absent, what happens to a household? It becomes worldly. There's no mention of God there, there's no thought of higher teachings, there's no devotion to the deity, and there's no service of God and mankind going on there. That's pasu. It's animalistic life. It's sensual life. It's materialistic life. It's hedonistic life. So put an altar there. All of a sudden you walk in and your mind goes towards it. Oh, it's time to worship. And I can no longer see the hairs on my arms. It says it's getting too dark. That's time to sit down and worship, Sri Ramakrishna says. So when dusk turns to dawn, and dawn turns to dusk, and when lightness turns to dark, and dark turns to light, that's where man remembers that the universe is not under his control. And he must sit down and worship a higher deity. And when he bows down before the image, that's the first time his head fell below his heart. When you bow down, it's the first time your head gets below your heart. And that's a good thing. It's called humility. It's called self-surrender. Sharanagata. And it's based on sacrifice. Next week, I'll give you a teaching on the importance of tantric teachings like sacrifice. Yagya is the great word. The 5 great yagyas and the storehouse of 12 minor yagyas, Krishna teaches in the Gita, which is very tantric. It's coming from a Vaishnava deity, basically, isn't it? It's tantric. What else is important here? One of these great connecting points between Tantra and Vedanta is recitation of the mantra. Swami Brahmananda, that is Sri Ramakrishna's great disciple named Rakal in the Gospel, he says, gain control of the life force in a natural way. Through the practice of japam and meditation, you will reach the stage of kumbhaka without risking the dangers which can easily come from the practice of asana and breathing exercises. So beings are trying to force the issue sometimes. That's why energy rises up prematurely and causes them problem. If you talk from the Kundalini standpoint, Kundalini yoga, because remember, we are talking that way, aren't we? We're looking into Kundalini yoga as Maha yoga, as a supreme yoga, and taking the devotional aspect out of it, and looking at the 9 limbs of Bhakti. When Ram talks about the 9 limbs of Bhakti, all of a sudden we find out that reciting the mantra is the 7th limb. And when we find out about the mantra, we find out that great beings like Rakal in the Gospel, Swami Brahmananda, the Jagad Guru, Kalindi Fulakamale, Madhavena Kritarata, Brahmananda Navastubhyam, Sadguru Lokanayaka. I salute Swami Brahmananda, who is the world teacher. The reason that he's not so prevalent is Vivekananda took the spotlight. See, everyone looked at Vivekananda, this great light. But Swami Brahmananda was equally as great. And there are mantras written about him, calling him the world guru. Sadguru Lokanayaka, the guru of the lokas, all the worlds, not just this world. He's recognized in all the worlds. You might not recognize him here, but if you visited the realm of the ancestors, the realm of the angels, the realm of the gods and goddesses, and you mentioned Swami Brahmananda, they'd all go, Satguru Lokanayaka. He's known in all the worlds. Simply see him, and you would know him. See? So, what does he say here? You can reach kumbhaka. Kumbhaka means a state of breathlessness, a state of samadhi. If you control the life force in a natural way, you don't force the issue by practicing a lot of asana and a lot of breathing exercises, you're pushing the envelope there. You're at risk. You'd have to be very strong in order to prevail against the forces that you might awaken by doing too much posture and too much breathing exercise. But he says, why not awaken it in a natural way through recitation of the mantra? There's a great key and a great teaching now, especially in this Hatha Yoga climate of the Western culture we're in right now. There's a key for you. Get a mantra from a teacher. Serve the teacher with devotion. Hear the teachings. That is, find out what the mantra means. Then sing it inside of you. Then spread it everywhere. And then associate it with the deity. Isn't it just like a step inward, this ladder from mantra? It's a step inward to each one of these things. And when you do that, then the mantra becomes for you the opening to control of the prana. The prana will come under your control without ever having to do anything, but just recite the names of the Lord. This is how bhakti and mantra and jnanam get together inside of you. So the more refined devotee knows how important the mantra is. They say, what's in a word? And the Vedic practitioner, the yogi, the seer would say, oh, you just don't know how much is in a word. I can even control the energies of all the worlds with a mantra, with one word. Aim, Hrim, Shrim. If I want wealth to come to me, I can say Shrim, Hrim, Klim, Aim, Kamalavasanye, Svaha. I can recite the mantra to the goddess of wealth. And as soon as she hears it inside of me, she's granting abundance already. See? Problem is, if I go look for material abundance, she's given me abundance of wisdom. And I'm not interested in money anymore. The wisdom shines. The money only has an outer glare. But the inner glare, see, the inner radiance, that's more beautiful. And so she attracts me right away. The true meaning of the goddess of wealth all of a sudden becomes known to me. It's all through a seed syllable, through a word, through a mantra. So that's how you spread the teachings. Finally, see God in everything. We see God in everything. The Gita says, God is in the act of giving, God is the offering, and by the Lord, the offering is given into the Lord for consumption. The highest state of consciousness is gained by those who see the Lord present in everything. What does that sound like to you? The food blessing in the Bhagavad Gita. Brahmarpanam, Brahmahavir, Brahmagnau, Brahmanahutam, and so forth. So this is a quote out of the 4th chapter of the Gita. It's all about seeing God in everything. And finally here, and we will take our break, is the 9th name of Bhakti, realizing Brahman. Vivekananda says about it, the scattering form of the mind is activity which manifests as pleasure and pain. The darkening form is dullness that tends towards injury. The gathering form is the struggle towards focus. The one-pointed form is the tendency to concentrate, and the concentrated form is what brings us to samadhi. That's a yogic teaching about the 5 levels of mind. That is Kshipta, Mudha, Vikshipta, Ekagra, and Nirodha. Father of Yoga says, the 5 kinds of mind. Those first 3 are not any good for practicing yoga. But if you can get one-pointed mind and no mind, then you're practically a yogi in 6 months. to get that mind under your control. So this is how to realize Brahman. He says, get that prana under control, and then go to a higher state of consciousness, focus there, and get the removal of all levels of consciousness except that one, the form of samadhi itself, or what Buddha called nirvana. So he mentions all of these in these 9 limbs of bhakti. That is nirvana, samadhi, and asampragata, all mentioned here as elements of the Maha Yoga path of bhakti. And there we will leave it for the break. And during the break, the live stream audience can see these 2 charts. And you may see them also at the break. You can come up and look at them. So now let's move on to our break for 10 or 15 minutes. Come back for a short second half. Aloha, namaste. Welcome back to the second half of our class. The first class in a 4-class series, which is speaking in terms of the convergence of the great streams of Indian philosophy called Vedanta and Tantra, with the necessary confluence of yoga and Samkhya and the 5 sects of Vaishnavism and Shaivism and Shaktism as well. It's a great amalgam, great coalescence that we're talking about. It's happened, it's always happening, and it's present today in the teachings of Mother India called the Sanatana Dharma. Sanatana means eternal, and Dharma, well, that's a hard word to define. But basically it means a divine life, a divine path. So when we look into this path, as we have been doing, looking into the chart Kundalini as Maha Yoga, and its counterpoint, Abava Yoga, we see another correlation between the path of formlessness and the path of form. There have been so many great beings who have pondered that duality. Basically, if we want to say we want to move past our pasu, our animalistic nature, and get to a more heroic nature, virya, and get on to a divine nature, then we're probably going to want to begin to withdraw from some of those attachments we have to external things and activities and pleasures, and begin to refine ourselves more. And in that way, then we'll begin to have these experiences of abava, no moods. Moods are called gunas also in my tradition. Gunas are 3, basically: slothfulness, restlessness, and balance. And of course, they apply mainly to the mind. You'll find them in nature, and you can find scientific correlations to them, but you'll also find them most prevalent in the mind. When a mind gets lazy or heedless, or as we were saying at the break, mindless, or when a mind gets restless and cannot control itself, and then when the mind all of a sudden, almost without any effort, achieves a sense of balance, and this feels very sattvic, we call it in our tradition, for some time, but then wakes up the next morning and that sattva is gone, and it wondered why it lost its balance for no reason. There are many, many reasons why it did, not to speak of karmas coming back on it from the past, but also just the mind's nature to be shifting all the time. So one of the great practices then is to try and keep the mind in a sattvic state, or a balanced state. They call that peace of mind, and it's a springboard towards Abava Yoga, towards a mode of the mind which is beyond all modes, a sort of flatlining, or as Vivekananda said in that last quote we talked about, when he mentioned the 5 kinds of mind that Patanjali talks about, that 5th state where he gets Nirodha, or no mind, Buddha mind, pure mind, God's mind. That is even probably beyond the cosmic mind, which is Mahat, or the great mind. When one attains to that, then one feels in a non-dual state. When they come back to the world from that non-dual state, they bring that, you might say, coloration of the non-dual state back with them, and it begins to color everything. That's why Sri Ramakrishna said, if you put on yellow glasses, then you'll see everything yellow. He was talking about putting on the glasses of non-dual vision, and then seeing everything, even the many dualities, the many variations, see nothing but Brahman in it. So that's, of course, a very high state of yoga. It would be called Abava Yoga. We're also looking at the Maha Yoga, which means all of these other elements in it. These are the tantric elements here, and these would be more of the Vedantic elements and the yogic elements. We'll get to them in a minute. But I wanted to show you quick, since we looked at the 9 limbs of Bhakti, these other teachings on the Bhakti Yoga path, which have to do with 9 these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, sometimes they call practices or aids, devotional aids that Narada talks about. He talks about them in terms inside of the Narada Sutras. Narada Bhakti Sutras are called. It's a great Bhakti text that is easily available, and you can pick that up and read it, and it's just a series of slokas with commentary that is really kind of almost a Bible of Bhakti Yoga. It's one of the main texts on devotion. So that is something to look for, like this this chart and this chart, which I have a story about, and because I've composed some 200 or more of these charts over the past few years as visual aids for people. So there's been a lot of charts that I've thought of putting together. So early on I thought, well, I should put out a chart on the 8 devotional aids. So I did that, and this was it. But then a year later I thought to myself, I should put out a chart of the 8 devotional aids. I'd forgotten that I'd already done it. So I went ahead and, without even remembering the other one, did this one. Now the interesting thing is that this one's in the Vedanta category and this one's in the Tantra category. So even before I even knew it, I was already proposing that Vedanta and Tantra were 2 great streams, and was working that way even unbeknownst to me. So I'm just putting these up here so you can see them. They're both basically about the same, but in 2 different states of mind, as it were. I was creating these 2 different charts on the same subject. Now in this one you see the first, in the sutras, actually you can quote from them. He says, "Bhakti is intense love for the Lord. In its intrinsic nature, this divine love is tantamount to immortal bliss. By attaining it, man becomes perfect, deathless, and verily fulfilled for all of eternity." Now if we look at the other chart and its first quote, it's another one of the Bhakti Sutras. Devotion is the eternal truth alone. Devotion to the eternal truth alone is the greatest bhakti. Though of itself always and never one, bhakti manifests itself in many forms, and there are several aids by which one can attain it. And therefore, I used this image of Narayan, or Vishnu, you might say, and the various rays coming out, and you can see these different practitioners practicing Shravanam, Sharanam, Kirtanam, Sevanam, Smaranam, Archanam, Bhajanam, and Vandanam. And there's even a song that I wrote about it very early on. Ramakrishna Shravanam, Ramakrishna Smaranam, and so forth. It means pretty much that this practice of 8 devotional aids purifies the mind, especially when it's connected to the deity, in this case to Sri Ramakrishna for me. Now you see there that Shravanam means hearing of God's glories. It's already looking a little bit like the 9 limbs of Bhakti, isn't it, that we just looked at. Sharanam means taking refuge in God. Interestingly enough, that is a tantric, we'll look at this chart more next week, but it's a tantric qualification over here. Brahmanishta, Brahmavadi, Brahmaparayana means faith, path, and refuge are all in God. So there's no indeterminacy there. There's no waffling, there's no postponement, there's no procrastination, there's no doubt or unsurety. That's it. It's Brahmanishta, Brahmavadi, and Brahmaparayana. You have your faith, your path, and your refuge is all in God. For the devotee, that's probably going to mean in Krishna or in Ram or for a Shaivite in Shiva, or for a Shakta in Divine Mother, the deities will change according to the different paths and predilections and the temperaments of the Bhakta, but that one deity is represented best in the formless reality. That's why you have to have Maha Yoga and Abava Yoga together, because like I say, sometimes your mind will drift towards the deities and the forms. As I used to say, you need friends in high places. So you're going to want to have the connection with the deities. Then sometimes your mind will shift away from form and the needle will go the other way, and all of a sudden you'll be in the state of non-duality and you'll feel very fine there. You won't feel like considering any forms whatsoever. Sort of like sailing on an ocean. There's nothing there, and that's perfectly fine with you. And just nothing but the distant horizon and the ocean. So you get into that state of formlessness, or abava, no moods are prevalent in you. And you're very content in that state, even inspired by it. So Brahmanista, Brahmavadi, Vadi means path. Your path is Brahman, and your refuge, Prayana, is also in Brahman. So it's a beautiful teaching with no unsurety to it. And Kirtana means singing and dancing for God. Sevana means serving God and his devotees. That's much like that, serving the teacher and the devotees. Smarana means constant remembrance of God. Archana means adoration of the Lord. Bhajanam, heartfelt devotions to the Lord. Vandanam, devout worship of the Lord. You can see these all indicated here. A person doing puja here in front of the altar, and and singing and dancing for the Lord, and kirtan, and shravanam, hearing the teachings. Shravana means to hear. So you're sitting in front of the teacher and you're hearing the teachings about the Lord. And in that case, it could be teachings like called Leela. In Christianity, we're actually no stranger to Leela, because in Christmas, even on the lawn, you have Leela. Right? There's like the three wise men, Christ in the manger, all lit up. That's Christ's Leela. Everyone's still remembering the story of Christ, and well, that they should, because it's actually going on according to the collective consciousness every day and every moment. Christ is there. So just by remembering that in any way, you're bringing Christ forward to this eternal moment. And what's really happening is that you're moving to the eternal moment, away from the facade of past, present, and future, and you're arriving at one moment. It'd be like Abava Yoga again. You just exist in one moment all the time. You're not brooding on the past, nor are you projecting into the future. And you're not spending the present wasting your time every day on menial things or mundane things, but you're actually posited in the Lord. It's like your path, your refuge, everything is in God, and that's where your thoughts are. So they're trying to call it things like mindfulness nowadays, but that's just a practice towards it. And these devotional aids are more towards the point. So this is all a teaching, no matter which way you look at it here. Also, but on this chart, you find that I added into it, I don't think I added it into that one, Narada's 11 forms of divine love for God. That's very beautiful. Love for chanting, love of God's beauty, love of heartfelt worship, love of God's presence, love of being God's servant, love of being God's friend, love of being God's child, love of being God's beloved, love of surrender to God, love of absorption in God, and love of the pangs of separation of God. You even love being the pangs of separation you feel, because that means that you're a true devotee of God when you are feeling far away from the Lord, like embodied. So these 11 forms of divine love for God are very beautiful expressions of how a devotee feels. And you might recognize in some of those the 5 moods, right? The Panchabhavas, they're called. They're actually practices that Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa undertook. You'll see them described in the Gospel of Ramakrishna, where he assumed being the friend of God, and he assumed being the lover of God, and so forth. So those are all divine moods that you practice. Usually the human soul takes one of them up for a lifetime. I will be God's friend. And then he just envisions that he's God's friend, and he just considers God his friend for his whole life. And he perfects that practice. And in another lifetime he might take up another one and perfect that. So it's a devotional mood that you, in Tantra, in the path of Bhakti, that you adopt. And then you just stay with it the whole time. Very beautiful. You see beings, when you go to India, you see beings under the auspice of those moods. You meet them. And that's the particular attitude that they're assuming. Now, let's go. That was just a quick look at these charts on the 8 devotional aids. Let's go on to a more Vedantic teaching, because basically we've done a lot of Tantra, but we want to also segue in a lot of the Vedanta. Let's look at the 4 treasures and the 6 jewels. And you can see them there: Viveka, Vairagya, Shatsampati, and Mumukshutvam, as they are shown here. And also illustrated here. That's why I need 2 chart stands, so I can face off these 2 charts and show you 2 sides of the coin here. Now, those of my students are very familiar with the 4 treasures and 6 jewels. Probably all of you who have been with me have them by heart by now, at least in English, but more likely even in Sanskrit. But we've gone through it enough times where we don't really have to spend a lot of time on it. What I really want to do in this comparison of the integration of Vedanta and Tantra is to show you how this falls under that heading of Maha Yoga and Abava Yoga. How the 4 jewels, 4 treasures and 6 jewels are natural, inherent teachings to those paths. Now there you see Viveka, that is discrimination between the real and the unreal. And there you see Vairagya. Once you know the real and you know the unreal, then you reject the unreal and you accept the real. That's Vairagya, it's called. Then if you can do that, you immediately become cognizant of the 6 jewels: Samo, Dhammo, Puriti, Titiksha, Samadhana, and Shraddha. And that leads you to Mumukshutvam, that is liberation, yearning for liberation. So there's very little of actual practice in Vedanta. A lot of it that falls in the realm of yoga. You want to practice, and you go to yoga, or in Tantra there's devotional practices. But in Vedanta, they don't give you a lot of hands-on practice. So this teaching comes closest probably to a Vedantist's practice. If you are a Vedantist, pure and simple, then this is probably what you're doing, and it's all a mental yoga. So in that way, you're discriminating away all of that which is non-essential to your life, and not letting it take over your life and impede you and cause you to brood or to suffer. And so you simply go into the mind and you pick apart your mind and see what's causing you to lose focus or lose balance or suffer, and you just extract that with the power of your own will. And once you have done that, then you can practice detachment in its different levels. There's many different kinds of levels, really, of detachment. In fact, sorry for shifting there so quickly, but I wanted to show this chart in levels of detachment. and I'll only show it in terms of this levels that the Father of Yoga talks about. He says there are 9 levels of awareness in aspirants. First, those who can analyze only at the intellectual level. If anyone falls below that, then he doesn't even put it on the map. You see, if you can't even analyze at an intellectual level yet, you're just pasu. You're just animalistic, and you don't have any interest in higher things. It has to start at the intellectual level where you begin to analyze things. So that's his first vitarka pragya. Pragya means intelligence. That's where your intelligence starts to become realized. Then the next level of being is who distinguishes between knowledge and ignorance, because there are, of course, many people who don't. To them, ignorance is knowledge. They're still laboring under many delusions about what's true and what's false. So they haven't really practiced viveka yet. That's the distinction between what's true and what's false, or what's real and what's unreal. So it's obvious that they haven't realized that yet. Both of these fall under the mridu level called mild detachment. They only have mild detachment so far. They're just barely getting the idea. Now, if you get to a 3rd level of aspirant who has gotten the experience of bliss, then you're getting to a madhya level. Remember, this is a teaching from the Father of Yoga, Patanjali, that falls in conjunction with these levels of Viveka Vairagya, which then is falling under the heading of Maha Yoga and Abava Yoga, or Vedanta and Tantra. How they all connect. So this person who has gotten the experience of bliss has reached a medium level of detachment. Ananda pragya. Ananda is that word that we use in Sanskrit for this bliss. If it goes to a 4th level, they're beginning to secure knowledge of the self. Possibly they heard from their teacher or from reading books on non-duality or Advaita Vedanta that the self was all in all and nothing else exists, and thou art that. That's how Vivekananda put it in one of his poems. The self is all in all, none else exists, and thou art that. So when you heard a great soul like Vivekananda say that to you, either in person or through one of his poems or through the complete works, then all of a sudden you got impressed with that and you begin to think, well, maybe I'm not so worthless after all. Maybe I do have a great self within me and it's pure and perfect and I should try and rise to it. I should try and live in it. So that's a 4th level, which also falls into the level of madhya, or medium. These are some of my students in the very, very early days who were sitting listening to me talk. And I'm not going to tell you which one was Midru and which one was Madhu and Madhya and so forth. Who knows at that point. Now if you get to this next level, which is an intense adimatra level, this is all broken into 4 levels, but 9 kinds of levels of aspirant, then you have someone who has subjugated all their desires. They've probably attenuated them or fulfilled them in the Dharma, because desires cannot be fulfilled any other way than in the Dharma. Satiation never comes in the world. You have to get out of the world and fulfill yourself in God, if you want to put it that way. And then desires can become matured and fulfilled. Otherwise, it's like pouring gasoline on a fire to put it out. People are desiring more and more, and it's just a non-ending conundrum that they put themselves in with much karma that collects in the past and in the present and moves forward to bind them. So if they've reached this Vashikara Pragya, this intense level of detachment, they have subjugated all their desires and now they can master themselves. If you wanted to put another column here, you could say that basically they've gone beyond the pasu to the virya, right? This really designates that they're heroic, that they don't give in to their desires anymore, that they can actually stand off from their desires. See, that won't help me. See, I don't need to give in to that anymore. There are higher things for me. And so they have a certain mastery, heroic mastery, virya. They're strong. Now if they move up another level, this level of aspirant who has succeeded in calming the waves of the mind. It's nice that Father of Yoga has has put these teachings in such intricate way that shows these various levels of subtlety. That is, you can subject your desires, but you may still be having troubles with the waves of your mind, the chitta vrittis. There's maybe 8 or 10 different chitta vrittis that the Father of Yoga mentions in his Yoga Sutras. I have a chart on that, but I don't have it with me. But basically, there are everything from demonic vibrations to vibrations of slothfulness and boredom, and vibrations of restlessness, of course, and then vibrations of vacantness, kind of drifting thoughts. Chanchala vritti, the mind drifts away and you have to bring it back and it drifts away again. So you haven't stabilized your mind yet and become one-pointed, and I has not become single yet. And then there's vibrations that even plague higher level of attainment that have to be smoothed out. So the person who has succeeded in calming the waves of the mind can sit in meditation very nicely for hours at a time and focus inwardly, and that would be where you get inner peace, self-control, self-settledness, and forbearance, concentration. Samadhana is a special kind of concentration that allows you to concentrate on God alone and X's out everything else. Most people's meditation, they think a little bit about God, then they start thinking about food, and they start thinking about what they're going to do when they get up from their meditation. These are all vibrations of the mind that they haven't mastered yet, haven't subjugated it. So when they sit for meditation, they should be able to just completely focus, uninterrupted, for the full period of their meditation. And if your mind is in a sattvic state, it's fairly easy to do. But if it happens to be in a restless or lazy state, it's going to be very difficult to do. So in a person who has attained that level of adimatra detachment, intensive detachment, they are good meditators. They're having a very good meditative life, very good contemplative life. And that meditation doesn't just mean like this, it also means like this. They have a scripture and they can study without getting distracted for an hour or 2 hours. And sort of like the Avadut saw the arrow maker. He had an order from the king to fletch a bunch of arrows. That word fletcher in the old times? I had a teacher, my second grade teacher's name Mrs. Fletcher. I didn't find out until later that meant arrow maker. But in the old times, the fletchers would fletch the arrow and make the shaft straight and put the points on it, and then create lots of those arrows and sell them to the kings for their armies. So that was their profession. So the Avadut was visiting the arrow maker one day, and he had this big order that he had to get done for the king. So he was fully concentrating on fletching the arrows, straightening the shafts. And then a marriage processional went by his door, and there were clowns, and there were jugglers, and there were acrobats, and there were elephants, and gala festive things going on. And the Avadut looked at him, and he never once looked at that go by his door. He was completely oblivious to the noise and to the spectacle of that whole processional going by. He was fully focused on what he was doing. So Avadut saluted him and said, "You're my teacher of concentration. I want to be able to concentrate like that, uninterrupted, even in the midst of noise and din and so forth." So the teaching has come to us basically that if you can meditate in the city and transcend all that noise of the street and everything, that you're probably a much better meditator than somebody who can do it out in the country, who doesn't really have much to overcome. If you don't have that ability, then yes, go sit by the river and let the waters hypnotize your mind into a peaceful state. Or maybe you'll have to put headphones on and listen to peaceful music or something. You see, different ways people are doing it. But if you can gain that kind of mastery of concentration, that's the sixth limb of yoga, And then the seventh limb of yoga is meditation. So you can get into actual meditation under your own auspice, by your own will. You can sit and meditate and fall straight into a beautiful, deep meditation. And you can have that again day after day. And you transcend the gunas, and of course all of these levels become a thing of the past to you, or past master of it. So that's a very important, virama pratyaya it's called, very intense level of practitioner who has arrived there. And like I said, it's these 6 jewels that are coming to bear because remember, the father of Vedanta did a beautiful commentary on the father of yoga's sutras. That's what we're using in our email course, Raja Yoga. We're using Vedavyasa's commentary along with Vivekananda's to explain the Raja Yoga sutras. I think we've had some 78 or so lessons now in that people are following on the email. And so we're getting a beautiful testament between the founder of one great system and the systematizer of another. So when you see these correlations, you can see, you can draw them pretty easily if you've studied them. Samadhana, a special type of concentration. So then if he or she, that great practitioner arises more, he achieves abiding peace of mind. Our Holy Mother, Sri Sharda Devi, who is my teacher's teacher, said, you need peace of mind first and foremost. So you're not going to gain anything spiritually, meditatively, probably even in business or in work, if you can't hold peace of mind, if you can't get peace of mind and keep it. If you want to put that anteriorly, that is, if you want to put it in another way, you could say that peace of mind will never come, if you don't gain that control over yourself. That is, you should not lose your peace of mind for any reason, not for loss of job or any other reason. Nothing should ruffle your peace of mind because you've already attained and succeeded in calming the waves of the mind, so why should anything bother you from then on? So you should have achieved abiding peace of mind, and if you haven't, then you'll fall down from that level when you try and attain it, won't you? Because something will come along and disturb you. You might be feeling great for a while. You think, I think I've mastered yoga. And a phone call comes, you're fired. And you get all frustrated and immediately fall out of yoga. Or you'll get a cold. I think, I'm healthy all the time. You get a cold. You react to it, and all of a sudden you're out of yoga. So staying in yoga is a very, very difficult thing, very subtle. It's a balance you have to achieve, strike and achieve, and anything can throw you off. Why? Because the mind's waves may begin to become erratic again. And so that's your barometer for an advanced practitioner. If my mind has been affected by any given thing and has ruffled my peace, then I'll know that I need to work at this level until I can attain that equanimity that's unalloyed. My peace and bliss is unalloyed, undisturbed, uninterrupted. And if I can hold that, then I have pure sattva. I can put it on anything, that kind of concentration. And you're beginning to then get to this level of mumukshutva, moksha, or mukti. That is liberation. And the way the yogi would put that is, who has learned a skillful means of yoga. So you can see how that matches very well with the eighth limb of meditation, and also with this sincere desire to be free. Nothing else is going to impede you or thwart you from your desire to be free. No pleasure, no person, no urge or desire. Nothing will waylay you from that goal that you've selected for yourself, that highest goal, paragatam, the supreme goal, Buddha called it. So that's upaya pratyaya. It's the most intense form of detachment until one gets aditratman. That is paravairagya, supreme, who possesses supreme detachment. So these are the 9 levels of detachment in aspirants as father of yoga observed them, probably in his own students and in the general scope of humanity at that time when he was living. Probably maybe 150 AD, they say, father of yoga, possibly. He came after Lord Buddha and after Christ. So he systematized that yoga at a later time, because earlier time would be several thousand years before Christ. Those were getting more back into the Vedic times. Conservative estimate, I would say. So a little important but helpful sidetrack to this teaching of the levels of aspirant. Now back to here then, we've seen that if we read a few of these quotes, we'll get a better idea of what Vedanta wants us to learn through this teaching of the 4 jewels, 4 treasures and 6 jewels. He says here, the sages have spoken of 4 qualifications for spiritual attainment: deep discrimination between the eternal and the non-eternal, renunciation of the fruits of action, acquiring the 6 jewels, and longing for liberation. With these 4, when these 4 are present, devotion to reality succeeds. When they are absent, it will fail. So any good, strong, resilient spiritual life is going to be based on viveka. And who took that for their name in order to illustrate the importance of that to today's practitioner, because people are doing all sorts of things without viveka, without the proper discrimination. So they find out that their spiritual life either fails after a while, or they never really set foot on the path. It was all sort of a nocturnal writhing about in the confluence of tides that happens just before the river reaches the ocean. That's how Sri Ramakrishna put it. And the very confluence of rivers come together, and then it flows out into the bay. And the sailor can't get out to the bay. He's caught in these different tides and eddies that are going around. And finally he gets his sail and everything just right, and he pierces through, and he's out of the bay, out into the bay, and out of that confluence of tides and eddies and so forth. So Ramakrishna used that example as this plight one gets in without mastering viveka and using it in their life. The discrimination between the eternal and the non-eternal. Doesn't it sound sort of like if there's one fiber sticking out of the thread, then you can't pass it through the needle? So if you have Vivekananda early on in your spiritual life, then your spiritual life will probably go fairly smoothly. And if not, then, as he says here, and as Patanjali said, if they're present, it will succeed. If they're absent, it won't. So these 4 jewels are very important. Other teachings about Viveka, basically if you want to look into what Viveka consists of, it's Adhyaropa and Apavada. Recognizing false superimposition and the refutation of misconception. False superimposition is the green scum over the lake. Just to sort of cut to a definition, the lake is still itself, but there's this green scum covering it. You have to part it in order to see your reflection in it, and then this green scum comes dancing back. So false superimposition is in the nature of relativity. Basically, it's that everything is formless, but form is covering formlessness. So anytime a form appears, and this is a pure Vedantic teaching, every time form appears, you're to practice viveka, discrimination, saying that's unreal. And this goes back to the Maha Yoga, to the Abava path, doesn't it? Basically, neti neti, not this, not this. You're going towards reality by negation. It's the negative path. You're taking away things, and those things that you're taking away are in your way. Get thee behind me, as Christ said, about all things devilish. So when you counter something that's in your way, any kind of a form, or even a thought of a form, like in meditation, you're trying to get into a formless state and thoughts are coming to you, that's false superimposition. and you haven't mastered it enough, you see, to arrive at a place where you've subjugated all desires and calmed the waves of the mind. So that's the level you're at, that's the level you need to work on so that you can come to, with the use of adhyaropa, recognizing false superimposition and moving beyond it. And when you do, refuting the misconception that comes from it. Abava. In other words, form is trying to insinuate itself over formless reality, always and ever, from the cosmic mind on down, through all the cosmic principles, which is why it's good to know your Samkhya Yoga, right? Because then you know when they say false superimposition of form over formlessness, then you ask, what do they mean by form? Everything from cosmic mind down to the element earth is form, isn't it? Any thought is a form, any act is a form, any deed is a form, any body is a form, any planet is a form, any world is a form. Form is gross, subtle, and causal. So if that's covering my vision of formless reality, then I must do away with it. I must pierce through it. And that's the only way I'm going to have non-dual samadhi, or get into nirvana, or experience satori, or achieve asampragyata, seated, unseated samadhi. And that's the ultimate goal of all these darshanas. I just stated 4 ways of speaking in 4 different darshanas: Buddhism, Yoga, Vedanta, and Samkhya. They had their words for the ultimate reality, and they all are in concord with each other. So, false superimposition to the Vedantist is nothing like a sentient evil. It's more like the natural ability of form to cover formlessness. It's in the nature of mind and relativity, so therefore you need to get beyond mind. This is why, and there are even jokes about it, the Buddhists are talking about, destroy the mind. It's make it into no mind. Drive me out of my mind, O mother, one of the tantric aspirants sings in one of his songs. O mother, blast my concept, blast my ability to conceptualize with the mind. Drive me completely out of my mind. So he knows there's a state of mind beyond mind, a state of no mind, or Buddha mind, or pure mind, as Ramakrishna called it. And from there he can view everything that came out of the mind. He's the witness at that point of his own mind. Sounds like some of these levels, doesn't it? You can, peace of mind and so forth, you can actually witness the workings of your mind. What to speak of your mind, you could witness the workings of the collective mind. When Buddha saw that, he wanted out of the world. Collective mind is a mass of karma. And in present day, for instance, Swami Vivekananda, he would say things like, I'll go anywhere, I'll help anyone, I'll talk to anyone, but if I had my druthers, I would be only with the devotees of God. Those are my people. And then another time he said, O Lord, save them all, everyone, and save me from them. Because he saw how problematic the collective mind was. I mean, you're talking about cultures, races, worlds, not just physical worlds, the world of the ancestors, how problematic that is. When Buddha saw that, he wanted out of the river of time. And he found a way out. So these are the most marvelous beings. Everyone admires and respects them without understanding them. Like there's this one teaching that Christ gave. They call him, oh, he's come to bring peace. He's come to bring peace to the earth. He said, I've not come to bring peace. I've come to bring a sword. And with the sword I will separate father from mother, father from son, and mother from daughter. Christians are running around now with bumper stickers that say, don't mess with family. But Christ was here to mess with family. If the father was a devotee of God and the son was a no-good loafer, then he separates the two. One's going towards God, the other's going toward the world. One's going towards God and the other's worshiping mammon. It's just clear cut. There's no doubt here. So the one that's going towards God, he'll help towards God. The one that's going to the world, he'll leave in the world. That's why reincarnation is true. People are coming back again and again under their own auspice, under their own karma. God has nothing to do with it. Hands off. If you want to do that, go ahead. See, I'll pray for you, but may God save me from all of them. You see, because they're going down the road of samsara. And I'm a candidate for nirvana. So if you're a candidate for nirvana, a candidate for samadhi, for unseated samadhi, or for the highest realization, then these teachings make sense to you and you follow them. And you want out of the conflagration of karmas, of races, of individuals, and of the collective mind. And you're also going to have to eventually come upon that cosmic mind. The cosmic mind is the hub of all creation, or projectionism. That's called Lord Brahma, or Hiranyagarbha, the cosmic egg. And when you come upon that, you're going to have to hand the creation back to him. See, it's marvelous what you're doing there. I like your work, brother, but take it back. I want out. So this is how you understand a Buddha or a Christ or a Krishna. They're not here for any other reason than to help you. And if you didn't need help, they wouldn't be here. He's not come to expiate for your sins. He didn't come to spill his blood for your sins. He came here to tell you that you're perfect, that you're not a sinner, that you're divine by nature, and that you've fallen into the dream of sin, into the projection of transgression. But as soon as he wakes you up with the truth, then you should be free. And if you don't wake up, then it's not time, then he leaves you there. Give up all your wealth and follow me if you want to know the truth. The man couldn't do it. Even though he heard the truth, straight from the Christ, he couldn't do it. So, to understand these great beings is to understand these philosophies that they lived by and that became their advice to us, became their philosophies. And then you'll understand the great beings when you know that they're leading you to an ultimate place that's beyond creationism, it's beyond evolution, it's beyond time and space, it's beyond karma, it's even beyond peace. You see, you can't just stop at peace. And it's beyond just a desire for liberation. It's liberation itself that they want to lead you towards. So when we talk about Abava, the Vedantic perspective, some of the Buddhist schools and so forth, we're talking about a neti that proceeds by a negative path of doing away with impediments and with obstacles that are unworthy of your energy and of your thought. And the fact that you've been preoccupied with them for so many lifetimes is ignoble. And so from dreams awake, from bonds be free. Know the truth. Thou art he, thou art she. As Vivekananda used to quote from the Upanishads. Or he'd say, you up and out of delusion and ignorance. They used to ask him, after they heard these teachings, that is the early Westerners, 1800s, 1900s, just awakening to the Indian teachings, of which he was the harbinger for. They'd say, well, does that mean, Swamiji, that we should never be reborn? Should a man ever be reborn? And Swamiji said, I certainly hope he will not until he can do so in full consciousness. So he was drawing a sharp distinction, Viveka, his own name, Vivekananda, between living in ignorance and living in wisdom, living in dharma or being in adharmi, unrighteousness or righteousness. Sharp distinction between the real and the unreal, the eternal and the non-eternal. And if the non-eternal was plaguing you in any little way, he wanted to get rid of it for you. Or he would set it up so that you would want to get rid of it for yourself. Because he used to say, the teacher ruins everything by thinking that he teaches. You should just remove impediments and let the student walk the path, you see. So you have to do that. But if there's something in the way you can't see, then he might get in there and help you. See? Remove some impediments so you can see the truth. Because then you'll awaken naturally. That's what his companion, Brother Monk, said, right? We just read Swami Brahmananda's quote. He said, get a hold of the vital forces naturally. Do mantra and meditation. See? And then you will awaken naturally. You won't run the risks that people are running when they're trying to twist themselves into 150 different pretzel shapes, or huff and puff like a bellows in pranayama. Does a bellows ever get enlightenment? Or do some strange tantric practice like rubbing yourself with ashes. If rubbing yourself with ashes would give you enlightenment, then a village dog could have it. See? So, Jai Videshvara, Jai to the living Shiva, Swami Vivekananda, who has come upon us in this day and age and is teaching us the meaning of discrimination so that we can know the nature of these great beings that he worshipped. He worshipped Ramakrishna and he worshipped Buddha as two of the highest beings that ever came to earth. So if that doesn't blend Vedanta and Tantra, I don't know what does. If that doesn't evince a knowledge of Abava Yoga and Maha Yoga, I don't know what does. A little teaching in depth about Viveka. These two correlatives, Adyaropa, Apavada. When you find the misconception, get rid of it. Once you see the ignorance, then get rid of it. Pick it out of your own mind. So the practice of a Vedanta is to inspect their own mind. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, if you have a piece of paper, you see a nice white paper, and you hold it up to the light, you see all these imperfections in it. If it's not held up to the light, it looks perfectly white and creamy. So even hold your mind up to the light of spiritual practice and the teachings of the seers and see what imperfections jump out at you then. Then go about removing them. Then you're doing the Vedantic practice. It's a mental practice. If your mind becomes fine, your breath and your body will become fine. That is, your breath will even out naturally and your body will experience great health. Om apyantu mamangani vak pranaschakshu shrotramatra balamindriyani cha sarvani. Am I speaking in tongues? May my body experience great health. May my life force flow unimpeded. May my mind expand in its capacity to know Brahman. That's an ancient mantra by the rishis from the Vedic period. That's one of the peace chants, one of the 7 peace chants. And my mind expand in its capacity to know Brahman. So start with the mind, expand it, know Brahman, and watch breath and body and senses and every other thing come into perfect alignment. This is the way of the superior yoga. It's the way of the Jnana yoga. And Bhakti yoga plays an important part. That is, your worship of the tantric deities. Your acknowledgement of their presence inside of you, as aspects of yourself. Because even the senses are called the 9 mouths of mankind. They eat. 2 eyes, 2 nostrils, 2 ears. 7, 8, and 9. You see, the 9 openings of the body, Krishna called it in the Gita. They're like mouths, and they're called indriyas. Indra means God. Indra is the God of all gods. Apyayantu mamangani vak pranaschakshu shrotra balam indri yani cha sarvani. May all the senses become pure. Indra means there's a power of my eye to see, there's a power of my ear to hear, there's a power of my tongue to taste, there's a power of my arms and legs to feel. The arms and legs, the eyes, the mouth, the nose are on their own are nothing. They're decaying flesh. But there's a power in there that causes them to see, that causes you to hear. And thank God for it too. Because when you sharpen it, then you hear the truth. Thou shalt know the truth, and you should be free, right? So people are hearing all sorts of things. They're hearing all sorts of everyday mundane mantras, like, how's the weather? Or shall we go party? What's your favorite beer and cigarette? You see, they're hearing all sorts of common mantras. Their life is filled with it. But do they ever hear the truth? Do they even ever think of God by accident? Well, we're trying to think of God on purpose, because God is all there is. So in that way, we follow a path that has a plethora of teachings, more than you can shake a stick at, in every different department. Tantra of the heart, Vedanta of the great mind, Samkhya of the great cosmic body, and yoga of the great vital energy. See, the breath, the prana, wherever you look, and more, there are teachings in abundance that are there to help you realize the true nature of the self as being divine. So if you come upon that ocean of wisdom, then how to compare other oceans to it? Particularly the ocean of samsara, the ocean of universal suffering. Can't compare. Who'd want to go there? It's not even a nice place to visit. You might have noticed out there. So get yourself into a nunnery. You see, Shakespeare said, get yourself to a nunnery, Get yourself to a monastery, get yourself to an ashram, get yourself to holy company, and glean what there is there to teach. Glean. These are jewels, right? Pull them out, polish them up, get inner peace, self-control, contentment, titiksha, samadhana, shraddha. See? Get those things. Now, the only other thing to say in the remaining 5 minutes is that I was going to segue from this chart on the actual discrimination and detachment, or the 4 treasures and 6 jewels, to a way in which Lord Vashishta, one of the ancient rishis, far, far earlier than Vedas, was uncovering for us a sort of step-by-step process up the, or probably better said, inward, this ladder of involution in neti-neti fashion. Why don't I read it out for you quickly in the 5 minutes, and we can study it next Sunday as we come upon it more. Remember, this teaching of neti-neti is a negative procedure. But it's supposed to end in iti-iti. Iti-iti means all this, all this. So the teaching you usually get in Vedanta is neti-neti, not this, not this. You remove things and get things behind you. It's a very effective way of negative procedure, negation. But it's supposed to arrive at a pinnacle called iti iti. In that regard, then, this great seer called Uddalaka, who's mentioned in the Yoga Vashishta, took this journey of neti neti. We must start at the bottom. First, he began to reason with his mind and practice neti neti with this kind of practice. It's also called Atmavichara. So you basically inquire into the nature of the self. Who am I? Are the three words you would use. Who am I? So you can't just sit around and ask, who am I, who am I, who am I? But you have to actually find out what you're not. And those things which are changing constantly, which are insinuations on your consciousness, which don't belong there, or which seem to belong but you outgrow, become bored of, or you're done with them after time. Those things are the things you want to suss out, find out early, and omit from the picture. And as you do that, the picture becomes clearer and clearer. The overlays go away, and eventually you're left with just this vision of one or two very high cosmic imperatives, like, say, the cosmic mind and Om, the word. Those things will remain for a very long time. Your samskaras of meditation and samadhi will take over as you practice, and therefore you will move along that trajectory. The trajectory for him was to reason with the mind and practice this neti neti, fix the body in an inviolate posture. Remember, he wasn't doing a lot of asana, ekasana was his thing. He sat in this posture, cross-legged, tripod, stance, that afforded his chakras opening and energy coming up his spine, and so he could open to higher awareness. He focused his mind. He controlled the 5 pranas, or the 1 prana in 5 forms, his breath, with his breathing process. He separated senses, that's that word we just had, indriyas, from their objects, so he wouldn't let the senses run back outward at their objects anymore. And he rendered objects non-existent with clear discernment. Now, that very much is the path of Abava. Rendering objects non-existent. You're negating them. In other words, their appearances, they're not what they seem. They're just swirling particles. So they're not really what they appear to be at all. All objects. So he did that inside of his mind. He concluded and came to a great realization about the non-existence of objects. Then he closed the 9 gates of the body, also advised by Sri Krishna in his own way, fastened the mind and the heart to simulate death. So took his mind into his heart and said, I no longer have a body, I am a spirit, I'm pure spirit. Then he destroyed the mind's tendency towards thought forms, sankalpa vinasha. And then he came upon this great granti here, this kind of division that he had to pierce through. He went beyond just practice to actually a form of experience. There's practice, there's the lower experience, there's the higher experience. It's called sadhana, leading to savikalpa, leading to nirvikalpa. Or in yoga, it would be leading to sampragata samadhi, seated samadhis, higher awareness, to no awareness, abava, nirvikalpa, where you have no awareness of anything but God. That's what the Buddhists mean when they say empty. They don't mean empty of essence. They mean empty of all forms that got in the way of me seeing the essence, of realizing the essence. Then he discriminated away avidya to behold the heart's light. There's that word again, viveka. He perceived the great light to overcome his own incapacity. He mastered the tendency towards sleep, which is at a very deep level, deep sleep. And then he uncovered primal moha, that is ignorance, and dispersed its darkness. Then he realized nirvikalpa samadhi and took one of these 2 routes, either to nirvikalpa, where he would return, or into satya samanya. We'll get into all of that next week. when we meet at the SRV ashram in Honaka'a, and we'll live stream that for all of you too. And we will look at this neti process and go on with this examination and exploration of the two great streams, Vedanta and Tantra, with all their various currents and eddies and the confluence of other rivers flowing into them, like Samkhya Yoga and the 5 sects, the 6 Orthodox darshanas. A great picture of India at her best. So let's end here with a chant. Om Tachnayo, Om Tachnayo Ravrini Mahe Gatum Yagyaya Gatum Yenupataye Daivi Svastrastu Naha Svastir Manusebhyaha Urdhvam Jagatu Bhesajam Samnoastu Dvipade Samchatushpate Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May we offer all into the Great Self. May we always delight in this offering. May we always revere the Lord and Mother of all sacrifices. May divine blessings be upon us. May peace be unto the entire human race. May healing, well-being, and prosperity then also abide among us. Om Peace, Peace, Peace. May peace be unto us. May peace be unto all. Om Hari Om.